Hey everyone, welcome to the Free Assange Vigil number 44.1, 44 consecutive weeks of doing this. That's just amazing. My name is Steve Poikinen. I am joined by Andrew Smith and Kendra Christian tonight. I will bring in our guest shortly. But before we do that, let's get you caught up on our current numbers. Today is 3,437 days since the start of the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange, 390 days since he was sold to the UK by President Lenin Moreno of Ecuador for the $4.2 billion IMF loan. Reality Winner has been incarcerated now for 1,066 days. But on the positive note, today marks the 52nd day of freedom for Chelsea Manning and the end of the 10-year-long WikiLeaks grand jury. So let me please introduce friend of the vigils. He's back with us again. Our good friend Krish Mohan. How are you there, man?
Hello. I'm good. How are you guys?
Hanging in there.
Yeah, I feel like that's about what everybody is. Either we're doing well or we're hanging in there.
So we recently saw Julian's extradition hearing, as of the 4th, got moved for now until September at some point. I believe the date's yet to be formally announced, but we do know that it will be taking place somewhere inside of there. We've seen his bail get denied amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw the court extort the names, essentially, of his fiance and 2 children. And just so many other things just in these last couple weeks. I was wondering, Krish, if you could give a little breakdown about your thoughts of what's been happening to Julian recently.
I guess the delay is kind of a win, right? Like they're not forcing him to go into a bullshit trial in the middle of a pandemic. So I guess that's kind of a win. I don't know if I would call that like hooray, let's pop the bubbly or anything. And it gives us a little bit more time to, or I guess it gives his defense a little bit more time to like push back against this bullshit narrative that they've created for him. I mean, as far as him still being in prison, why is the big question that I think everybody should be asking, because first of all, he shouldn't be. He served his time for something that he didn't even need to serve his time for. So, it's like most murderers get out on good behavior faster than what they've they're giving Julian Assange. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like they're treating murderers and cannibals with more respect than Julian Assange is, which doesn't really make any sense to me. So as far as him still being in Belmarsh, it's nonsense. It's always been nonsense, and I don't think it's really hard to justify it at this point. Like it's really hard to justify him being in Belmarsh prison in the middle of possibly like one of the worst pandemics we've ever seen. Like it's very difficult for people to be like, yeah, this guy belongs, behind bars in essentially a place where conditions are not sanitary. And he's somebody that is at risk. His mental health was already compromised. His physical health was already compromised. And let's put him in a more compromising situation. Like no one can justify that to be the right thing to do. So hopefully this delay means that they're considering, releasing him, or I mean, they could, if they really need to, why don't you just put him on house arrest? Like, wouldn't that be something that's far more beneficial than just saying, hey, you can just go home? If they really want to make this a case, like meet us in the middle somewhere, and they're just unwilling to do that. They're still keeping him in prison, which is insane to me that they're keeping him in prison. And it's also crazy to me that there are people that are like, yeah, he committed a crime, so he should be there. It's like the country of Iran released, what was it, like 80,000 prisoners or something like that. But we can't release one person who realistically shouldn't even be there in the first place,
I think that's such a good point too, because that's the thing as well with everybody saying that he needs to face justice and everything like that. Well, according to justice and in the eyes of the law, he's, not guilty. He's not guilty yet.
Right.
He hasn't even had a trial. He hasn't even had his hearing. And then to your point with the, why not have him on house arrest? They said that he's a flight risk, which is another, reforming of the narrative when he wasn't. He claimed asylum and was granted asylum. So, that brings a whole nother aspect to this case that's just so frustrating, I think, for everybody on the outside, seeing that, especially now with his life in danger, even further, with the COVID crisis, it's just really, really frustrating.
Wasn't there a UN rapporteur that basically said like what he's going through is equivalent of torture?
Yeah, it was Niels Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, that came out and said that yes, Julian Assange is being tortured. And then when the UK and other governments ignored the letter that he wrote to them, he sent them another letter like, hey, by the obligation of the laws and treaties that you signed, you can't ignore this letter. And I believe it was then that they got some kind of mealy-mouthed statement about due process out in regards to Julian's trial. So even with the UN literally saying, hey, this man is being tortured, I think the term that Niels Melzer actually used was he had never seen a gang of Western liberal democracies gang up in such a way to prosecute one person.
And it is a gang. Is it like that's kind of the best way to put it? Is like these are a bunch of thugs, and what I can't remember the exact quote that the judge taught. They called him a narcissist. The UK judge called him a narcissist. And then what did Pompeo call him? A
hostile non-state intelligence agency.
Yeah, hostile non-state intelligence agency. It like what? These are fucking nonsense words. Like he is a publisher. Could you imagine what would have happened if, somebody from the Guard, or not even from the Guardian, like even from the Intercept, this happened to, like James Risen, who I'm not a big fan of James Risen and what he reports. He's kind of turned the Intercept into this Russiagate conspiracy theory blog site. But it's like if he was given the same treatment as Julian Assange, we would be setting shit on fire, right? Like, how mad did we get that one of CNN's anchors was not allowed to attend press meetings with Trump anymore, right? And like now he's on a fucking book tour, ignoring reporters and not answering questions about other journalists being incarcerated. Like we would be up in arms if this was anybody else. But because this is Julian Assange, and because it's somebody that's attacked both the left and the right, it becomes okay. It becomes like excusable for us to sit there and say, oh, he's a hostile, non-state counterinsurgent, he's a narcissistic asshole that nobody needs to care about, when it's like this guy revealed everything wrong with like corporate oligarchy. Like this guy revealed war crimes. He revealed how the Democratic Party is trying to steal their own elections. and we're sitting there trying to like justify torturing this dude. It doesn't make any sense to me. Because if it was anybody else in the mainstream, shit would be on fire, like there would be Twitter campaigns out the ass to try to like get this person out of prison.
And that's the craziest part too, is we're not seeing as much of things like that pop up as you would really expect in this situation. So what we're trying to do actually is each week now we're releasing a different set of actions that people can take. Last week we had petitions, we had fundraisers, and we had contacting different media outlets, both independent, alternative, and mainstream. This week, actually, our first thing is driving by and throwing a digital slushie on Mike Pompeo because he made some ignorant-ass comments on World Press Freedom Day about repressive regimes and journalism. The second one is contacting European and global media organizations like press freedom organizations. We have 4 different House members, like U.S. House of Representative members to contact. And then also we've launched our GoFundMe for our DC protests coming up in September, because we have roughly an official date that we can sort of start planning around. So I dropped that in chat for everybody. If you're interested, go ahead and take a look at it and share the links out if you could, because I think that would be, even if you just drive by and throw a slushie at Pompeo virtually, I think it will make at least some kind of impact.
Wait, you got to explain this drive-by digital slushy thing.
So Mike Pompeo said, and I quote, "We commend the efforts of journalists working in repressive environments to support the free flow of accurate information, including on COVID-19. We call for the immediate release of all journalists imprisoned for their reporting. Hashtag World Press Freedom Day 20.
So he's saying Julian Assange should be taken out of Belfast.
Right.
That's kind of where we all went with it. Yeah, absolutely. Like, he got beat up pretty good on Twitter for it, but that's not, enough. But by all means, go ahead and kick Mike Pompeo around, please do that. I think he should be sandbagged with the video of the Italian reporter handing him a bag of dog food, like, nonstop. Did you see that, Krish?
I did.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. If you eat it 3 times a day, you may become as what? Kind and loyal as a dog?
Yeah,
honest and loyal, I think it was.
Honest and loyal. That's right.
Yeah, Mike Pompeo is America's deadliest Care Bear. Is really what he is.
That's real talk. Right there. That is.
He pretends like he really gives a shit, but he's a sociopath, man. Like I it's just one of those things. Like, I remember listening to that interview he did where he like freaked out on the NPR reporter, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, Mike Pompeo, this is so uncharacteristic." And I was like, "Are you sure? Like, uncharacteristic? This guy was the director of the CIA. Like, this guy's got repressed rage out the ass. Like, this guy's the like living representation of repressed emotions, and it just came out because somebody questioned him about some shit that they didn't want to. It's no different than like any other corporate Democrat or corporate politician going on any of these corporate mainstream news networks, and then they get challenged a little bit, like Nancy Pelosi telling Jake Tapper to calm down because he asked her a legitimate question for the first time in 10 years of reporting.
And what happened when she asked him to calm down, Krish?
How it was hilarious because he got smaller on screen somehow. It was just like, how can I condense my body to show that I'm not dominant? Can I roll over on my belly a little bit more? Like, they all bend the fucking knee. They don't do what these actual journalists are supposed to do and push back. Like, if Nancy Pelosi did that to anybody at the Gray Zone or the Mint Press News or even Democracy Now, for what it's worth, I don't think any of them would show their belly and cave in. They would push back on that and be like, "What do you mean calm down? There's people that can't pay rent, that can't buy food, their families are starving, and you're sitting there, having a fun soundbite moment, eating ice cream that none of us can afford in your $24,000 refrigerator." 2 of them, by the way. There are 2 refrigerators in that video, which is fucking insane. And then she has the audacity to sit there and say, "Oh, calm down. The governors will figure it out. Me and Chris we've all been working together. Me and or Andrew Cuomo have a couple of differences and we'll be fine." And it's like, you don't give us any answers. You don't give us any help. And then you sit there and tell a reporter who's finally doing his job to calm down. And he doesn't do anything about it because they're not trained to do anything about it.
That's so true. And I'm glad that you brought up Pelosi doing that as well, because I think, we see that with Trump, but that almost circles back right to where we started with, Assange being hated by both left and right, which makes him an excellent reporter. That's exactly like, it's like the press has just completely forgot how powerful they can be. When they're doing their jobs and they're there for the people, that is a powerful position. It should be the other way around, where politicians are fearful of the press.
Well, with
Yeah, they
Julian's
should be.
trial, it sets a whole new standard for that because it shifts the balance of power to allowing the government to prosecute someone for doing real journalism and real reporting. So what we saw there is something that will be seen a lot more because someone in power says like, hey, you asked me something that makes me uncomfortable. Like we can put you in jail. And then the water parts for them as they walk through to the other side of tyranny.
Yeah, and I think that's my biggest complaint with people in any part of corporate news or anybody that's kind of defending the actions of Pompeo and the UK and Lena Moreno is, well, I mean, you're essentially bending the knee for authoritarianism. Journalism is supposed to question shit. It's supposed to question people in power. People in a position of authority. The journalism is their watchdog. It is their checks and balance. That's what the freedom of press is supposed to be for. But I was watching some PBS. I can't remember. It was maybe a week or two ago that it actually came out, but it was Pompeo talking about Venezuela and his big speech on how the State Department handles more humanitarian issues than it does anything else. And nobody talks about how humanitarian we really are, which is crazy because it's like you have the most amount of sanctions during a time when the entire globe is calling for a ceasefire. The entire world is saying stop with the wars, and Mike Pompeo is actively going out there and saying, well, we have to put these sanctions because tyranny. And it's like nobody's you are the one that's causing tyranny. But that's the thing is, again, none of the journalists that I was listening to ask a question were pushing back on his narrative. Like one of the questions was literally asking about whether Juan Guaido was going to be accepted as the president of Venezuela, which is like, how much more of a softball question could you really get? Is you're asking the orchestrator of the coup whether he thinks his coup is awesome or not.
And this is because a U.S. Merc outfit just got caught last week trying to sneak into Venezuela to assassinate Maduro. Again, and the guy who got caught was like, look, I have this 212-page contract signed by Juan Guaido. It's, what, JJ Rendon was the guy who brokered it. He's a Florida-based, I don't know, goon, I guess you would say. And this also, like Trump's bodyguard was involved in this. And I just did a video on it on my channel, Slow News Day. It's insane, man. It's absolutely insane. And it was for like a crap ton of money.
So I have a question because we've been talking about the TPP a lot and the new evolution of it that somehow managed to be worse. In the TPP and its evolution, there is a clause that allows for corporations to sue governments for interrupting their ability to make a profit.
Yeah, the ISDS.
Yes. Would that private intelligence group or that private mercenary group be allowed to sue the nation of Venezuela for stopping them from assassinating their president because they lost that contract?
I think it would probably.
I don't see why they wouldn't push it.
Yeah, I think it would probably have to depend on how you spun it. Right. I mean, that it would more or less be a game of spin, because I mean, it is like you did go out to assassinate a world leader, like a legitimate world leader that the only country that doesn't recognize him is the United States. Like Canada recognizes Nicolas Maduro as the rightful leader of Venezuela. I'm pretty sure are we the only one? I might be wrong about that.
No, there's like it's like 55 or something like that, but it's all U.S. countries.
They're all U.S. allies, right?
The U.S. burps, they all sniff to see what we had for dinner. It's the client state sort of relationship. But even at 55 countries, that's still like 145 that don't, 135 that don't
Yeah.
recognize this guy as the because he's not. He's a
Yeah.
fake president. His ambassador is a fake ambassador. He couldn't even issue passports. While they still can't to this day. Can't issue a passport. And we had Kevin Zeese on last week, who was one of the 4 embassy protectors that were in there until they got hauled out. 27, 29 days. They were in there through all kinds of just maniacal stuff. Power cut off, water cut off. Weren't able to get food into them. Straight up tackling people. Guaido's, just paid mercs were standing outside preventing food from getting there. Just god awful situation. And then what? The State of the Union that's here. They march out Guaido like, hey, look at our puppet. Everybody wave to the puppet. All right, so everybody go with the puppet. We live in a cartoon, Krish Mohan. We do.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about unity within Congress from the Republicans and the Democrats, it's in supporting Juan Guaido. If you watch the State of the Union, the moment that Juan Guaido's name is even mentioned, Nancy Pelosi shoots up, right? And she's willing to applaud to him. I mean, if that segment would have gone 30 seconds longer, I think she might have thrown her panties up to, Guaido. Like
he's Wayne Newton at the Golden Nugget.
yeah, it would have been, it would have been bad. But it was that's where they meet in the middle. And whenever it comes to foreign policy, when it's authoritarian foreign policy, the Republicans and the Democrats are in line with it, So, and then I hear this argument of like voting for the lesser of two evils. It's like, what do you mean voting for lesser? Which one is gonna hurt less when they go to war with another country for no fucking reason? Like, is that the argument that we're making? Because they both support a coup of a country that nobody should be supporting a coup for. Like, that's, you're supporting a false leader. Both Democrats and Republicans support a false leader, and then they call it party unity, right? Like, oh, we can come together as and reach across the aisles for this thing, but you can't reach across the aisle for freeing Assange. You can't reach across the aisle for universal basic income or Medicare for all or any of the progressive things that we actually want. But all of the bullshit authoritarian shit, they're like, yeah, we'll reach across the aisle for it.
Well, it's important to remember, Krish, you're George Carlin. If we go and we read from the book of Carlin, Brother George says bipartisan just means that a larger than normal deception is taking place.
Yep. Yeah.
By the way, I've yet to have anyone refute that when I've trotted it out. I don't think George ever had anyone refute that in his entire life either. I can't think of a more accurate description of what bipartisan means, at least here in the U.S.
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday. I did a video about the Kent State Massacre, which was I don't know if there's people that don't know what the Kent State Massacre is. Maybe there's a 7-year-old watching the video that's a very big fan of Assange. Was like, maybe I'll check out this video. But if the Kent State Massacre is basically unarmed innocent protesters at a college campus that were essentially shot at by the Ohio National Guard over paranoia. That's basically what happened. It was overly paranoid National Guardsmen that ended up turning around and shooting these unarmed protesters that were protesting the Vietnam War. At the end of that, 58% of Americans in 1970 believed that the protesters were in the wrong and got shot because it was their fault, right? 31% of people had no opinion. Take that poll again 50 years later, and I would very much doubt if the numbers would be that high. 11% of people in 1970 believed that anti-war protesters being shot on a college campus is wrong. I would wager to bet that if you do the same study again, it would be a much higher number that thinks that unarmed protesters being shot is considered wrong, right? What does that mean? That just means that our leadership has no fucking clue what we the people actually want, because both sides, both the Democrats and the Republicans, will go to war unequivocally, no questions asked. It's all about freedom and making sure that our borders are safe, and we'll invent all the enemies that we need to ensure that even now they're continuing their economic wars with Iran and Yemen and Venezuela and Nicaragua. We're still dropping bombs in Iraq and Syria and Yemen, and it's just like, why? We're in the middle of a global pandemic, but both parties are like, yep, let's keep doing that. That seems fucking awesome, right? But if you talk to us, if you talk to the people, and once people figure out that, like, I talked to a friend of mine and I was like, yeah, there's still economic sanctions on these countries and they're not able to get like medical supplies. And Mike Pompeo is like, oh, well, humanitarian things can go through. And it's like, well, why doesn't Iran have that? Well, it's Iran's fault, is basically how they do it, right? When it's just like, well, if that's the case, then just instead of dropping bombs, why don't you drop a bunch of medical supplies for them? Like, why don't you do that instead? But you keep drone bombing the shit out of them. It doesn't make any sense. And if you talk to regular people about that, they're like, yeah, that also sounds crazy. Like, it's not in 50 years, our whole perspective of being anti-war, this bipartisanship of war that is in Congress, is completely shifted. People don't want war. People don't want these economic sanctions put on a country, and the people of that country suffer. You had oh God, what's his name? I think his name is Stockton. Correct me if I'm wrong. He was a former director of the CIA, and there's
he was an admiral too, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He basically came out and being like, basically the way that you have to crush a country is by putting economic sanctions on them, making the people suffer, and then convincing those suffering people that it's their government's fault that they're suffering, instead of us actually putting economic sanctions on them. So it's just like a gaslight campaign to make the citizens of a country turn against their government. And it's like, if you tell anybody that, and if you show people proof of the United States doing that over and over again, no one's going to support it. And everybody will start supporting anti-war protesters and activists, right? Everybody's going to look at what Julian Assange revealed with the help of Chelsea Manning and sit there and go, well, that's fucked up. Why is this guy in prison? But that's not how the narrative is spun. But the narrative is spun, well, war is good because it makes people from the Republican Party reach across the aisle to the Democrats, and the Democrats reaching across the aisle to the Republicans. Look at that. It's unity. War is bringing people together as we rip families apart overseas. It's like, that should be a T-shirt that they sell for Congress.
I mean, the IDF, I used to have a T-shirt, and I probably still do. I made it around a couple of years ago. The Israeli Defense Force, with a pregnant Arab woman, Muslim woman on it, and it said 1 shot, 2 kills, because it had her head in the cross.
Jesus.
Yeah, this is the IDF. That's the kind of merch they got. So it would only stand to reason that our Congress critters, who differ on some stuff about abortion and some stuff about guns, and that's about it, would have a similar thought process, because when you get right down to it, as much as it seems like Israel is our client state, more often than not, it plays out in the reverse, and that we are actually Israel's client state. It's How did we get to Israel from Venezuela? I'm sorry, I was talking about a few.
Oh, my giant rant about war being bipartisan. but yeah, I mean that's exactly what they're trying to do. Is it's like 2 shots, 1 kill, and you want to kill a pregnant woman. In no instance is that acceptable. But if you take the humanity away from a group of people because they belong to a different imaginary line than you do, then it does become acceptable, and you can sell that at a gift shop for $25.99, and people will buy it and proudly wear it and wave their flags of national pride or whatever the fuck they need to. And it's just like, it's, what are we giving up? Like, are you willing to give up your humanity for nationalistic pride? Like, are borders more important than human lives? But that's the thing, is like, who's asking that question? Like, who's looking at Nancy Pelosi and asking that question? Who's looking at Joe Biden and asking that question? It's not going to be on CNN. It's not going to be on MSNBC or Fox News, right? Like, it's going to be people like this, or the Gray Zone, or any of these independent journalists, but they're not given the time of day to talk to these people up at the top. Because the people up at the top don't give a shit. They want to go talk to people that are going to make them look good. And then when they're not, they're going to tell them to calm down and shut up.
So we're entering a. Oh, go ahead, Kendra.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just wondering what your guys' thoughts were, because it seems like, I mean, for decades that we've seen this same thing playing over and over again. When something doesn't go well, oh, well, that's the Republicans' fault. When something else, oh, well, that's the Democrats' fault. And, it's always the things that they agree on that we should be worried about. And there's part of me where I go both ways, where I'm just, especially with what happened with the DNC again, I'm like, it happened again. And I do feel like they've lost a big portion of people that maybe weren't lost before. So I'm wondering, if that's, part of this real huge push towards authoritarianism, because they think that that's, maybe they played this hand one too many times. I'm just wondering what you guys think about it. Or are we just seeing it's not broke, so why fix it? We don't need to. The same narrative works over and over. What do you guys think about that?
I think that the intelligence community and their puppet minions only have so many tools and ideas to work with, to where you see false flags getting repeated throughout history to get us in the war, all the way back to the point of our nation's founding was started with the Boston Tea Party, and people are programmed to believe that situations like false flags are, an acceptable form of collective lying, essentially. But we've also seen the entire anti-war movement back post 2008 get completely gutted. Under Obama, a lot of them closed down because he was supposed to be the anti-war president that came in and saved everything, so they didn't have to do much more work. So there's this double-edged sword of people buy the propaganda and then respond to it as if it's real, while at the same time, in doing that, it destroys the foundations of collectivism that we use to actually accomplish things as a civilization. But we've seen, essentially, in a lot of places, the lockdowns start coming to an end now, where the shelter-in-place orders are being lifted. People are allowed to go out of their homes and into the world again. So I was wondering, Krish, if you had any upcoming comedy tours or anything like that rescheduled with everything starting to open back up.
No. I actually lost more dates. Well, I'm out till June and July. I'll start with the good news, I guess. Is I'm doing these virtual Zoom comedy shows on Zoom, because it's just easier to get people on that platform. So I'm doing them on Fridays at 9 p.m. almost all Fridays. So I'm doing one this Friday at 9 p.m. and there's you get tickets, and it'll get you a confirmation that you got the ticket. And then an hour before the show, I send everybody an email with all the login information. And then people come in 15 minutes before the show's supposed to start. That's doors opening. And then, it's a mix of traditional stand-up and, mixed media with images and videos and commentary and stuff like that. So each show will kind of be a little bit different. But that's essentially what I've had to do, because I lost everything from the middle of March all the way up to the beginning of August right now. So that's 4 or 5 months that I'll just effectively be out of commission, because I make a living off of touring and doing stand-up and talking about these sort of ideas on stage. And this summer I was going to be on the road with Lee Camp, but we had to basically reschedule all of our dates, and we're not exactly sure when we're going to reschedule those either. So Lee's got his television show Redacted tonight, and he's also putting up a bunch of videos on Moment of Clarity. I'm doing the daily videos. I'm doing these virtual comedy shows. So we've kind of figured out a way to circumvent not being on the road with just more content, which is blasting the internet with more content. And the other reason for why I'm uncertain of whether I'll even be back on the road in August is, one, people are still worried about paying rent and bills. So going to a live show or to a bar or anything like that, I don't know if that's particularly in people's minds. The other part is there's a lot of venue owners and just regular audience goers that I think are a little scared that there's going to be a second wave that's going to come through, that there's going to be some kind of reinitialization of the virus, and we're going to be right back to where we started again. So, whether these venues open their doors again, they might operate at a lower capacity. So you might see a 100-seat venue operate at 25 seats or 30 seats just to make sure that everybody is, keeping safe and socially distancing the right way. Or they might just not do live events for a while, because it's just safer that way, and they can kind of prevent the spike of another outbreak or something along those lines. So I'm not exactly sure when I'll be back on the road, but in the meantime, like those virtual shows, I'll probably end up staying up for a little while after this to do some writing for that show, and it is talking about like events that normally you wouldn't hear on corporate media, right? Like it is criticizing capitalism. It is taking you through the the immigrant perspective, and like what citizenship is like, and how the more nuanced perspective of what's going on with this pandemic, and criticizing corporate media. So for people that are kind of like feeling bogged down from it and need a release, like there is still comedy shows around. And if anybody wants to come, there's still some tickets available for this Friday, but the next one will be on May 22nd as well. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So, no. With the second wave thing, the thing that I'm worried about, not that this isn't a deadly virus, not that there aren't people suffering from it, is the people that they're going to blame and the systems that they'll try and put in place around having a second wave, where I particularly think they're going to blame anti-lockdown protesters as well as general strike protesters and any other organizations that spring up in response to this horrendous bailout. Like if a new Occupy movement forms in regards to the $4 trillion that we gave to the banks while everyone else goes bankrupt. So that's as an organizer and someone that's trying to continue to get people in the streets in a safe way, I'm really concerned about the whole second wave thing, just from the perspective of allowing greater expansion of the intelligence community, allowing more artificial intelligence implemented through doctors' offices and law enforcement, as well as teachers. And then also any other little policies that can get snuck in there that expand government power that we have a hard time even finding out about.
Well, I would say that anybody that tries to blame the second wave on general strikes is bullshit, because virtually every single general strike and rent strike protests that I've seen have all been in cars, and they've all been doing the social distancing thing. They've all been wearing masks. They all kind of stay apart from each other, and they're very careful about it. Like, it is super well organized, which it should be, right? Like, if you're going to advocate for collective bargaining, if you're going to advocate for ensuring that there is a mortgage and rent freeze and people aren't going to go into debt and lose their homes, lose their apartments, and you're pushing for that, yeah, do it in a safe way. And you should have a good level of organization behind it. And they do. These lockdown protests, well, these people are just scared because they've never been in this position. They are coming from the perspective that work is everything. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur, and some people are comfortable just kind of being the grunt. And now it's like, oh, we have to think about ourselves. We have to think about who we are as people, and we've never fucking done that before, and that's scary as shit. When for someone like me, it's like that's every day for me. That's all the time. I just constantly think about who I am as a person and how to hate myself in a different way. That's how I kind of that's my status quo, you know. That's
You're a comedian.
Yeah, I mean, call me an artist. Long time ago, before I got invited to be successful elsewhere by the nation. A friend of mine sent me a little comic strip, and it was like how to be a writer. Step 1, drink. Step 2, hate yourself. Step 3, repeat.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So it's like, but these people have never done that before. So now they're just like, well, what do I need to not think about these deeper issues, to not think about, who I am as a person and what my purpose in this great world of ours is. Where do I fit into the universe? Well, I need a haircut. That's something that I can fight. And then they bring their guns and call these governors fascists and things like that. And it's just like, man, you're kind of missing the point of what we should be advocating for. Like, we shouldn't be advocating to go back to work for virtually no fucking pay. Like, we shouldn't go back to work just so the CEO of Target and Walmart and Amazon can make a shit ton of money off of your hard labor. Like, that's not what you should be advocating for. Like, if these lockdown protests really meant something, they should go and fight for the same things that the general strike protests are advocating for, which is better pay, better treatment of employees, and corporate transparency. Like, those are some major things that I think we can achieve if both of these, like, this is where we need that bipartisanship we were talking about earlier, right? I think
with the general strikes and the lockdown protests, I think trying to bring them together to demand an immediate reopening with these conditions met would be much more powerful. Because a lot of what the lockdown protests are about is the fact that we've been receiving just a shitload of disinformation, that this was, not that it's not real, but statistically overblown by global institutions that are seeking control. And I think if there was any way to unite essentially like the Ron Paul audience with the Jimmy Dore audience outside of a governor's mansion demanding Medicare for all through the National Nurses Union while we go back to work, I think trying to build something like that in this moment is extremely pivotal, but also something that can be done because of the level of desperation. Because most of the end of lockdown protesters, they're so worried about actually having a job that they're willing to go back into these slave-like conditions. I think largely because they don't understand the inherent power that workers collectively have.
Well, here's the thing, though. You can tell that the Reopen America protests are astroturfed like crazy because, as Chris was saying, the only demand is, please, boss, please, government, let me go and generate more income for my boss because his second mistress needs ass implants and a new Mercedes. And that's like it. That's all they want. So it's a manufactured construct. And I do believe it's possible to get, cross purposes. But as we found out, Andrew and Kendra in DC, like, you have to do that in a post-partisan fashion. And the reason these things are so politicized is to avoid that happening. There were over 170 different strike actions that took place on May Day. I had the two women who have been organizing Corona Strike as a hub for everyone else to gather and coordinate strikes on the show. I believe it was on May Day. And it's not like there is an overlap there. It's just the barriers that are put up by the politicization of it are fairly hard to overcome. Again, when there's the role of the media is to manufacture confusion because we already got consent.
Well, and I think too, with both groups, the one thing that they could agree on is that they would, maybe we could have some information, and maybe we don't, maybe there's a group of people that do want to go back mainly to work, and other group of people that want to, you know what I mean, and the lockdown for other reasons. And, I guess there's part of me that wonders, like, does everybody have to agree on everything right away to join in on something together,
Yeah, that's so I've been doing a whole bunch of videos on like different strikes and labor movement actions all throughout history. And that's always one of those things, is how do you get people from two different sides and two different ideologies to meet in the middle and say that this is the core set of things that we're going to ask for, and then build from there. And usually it starts basically with where the general strike protesters are starting with, right? And I'm kind of saying general strike as an overall of like all the strikes that we're seeing, which is essentially better treatment of the employees, better pay, better hazard pay, and corporate transparency. And on the other side, if you bring in the rent strike folks, I think you could look at you could look at the mortgage freeze, the rent freeze, and ensuring that the rent and mortgage prices aren't going to go up at the end of this pandemic. Those are all very reasonable demands to make, especially when you look at the fact that the corporate sector just got like a $5 trillion gift just handed to them by the federal government. And the way you could talk to people is bring that up, right? These people on the right, the lockdown protesters, are probably the anti-handout people, are probably going to sit there and say, well, I don't want to receive a handout. I don't believe in that. And anybody that does shouldn't do that. Well, the banks just did, the corporations just did. And if they go, well, yeah, of course the corporations did, because that's how the government, that's how the government operates. It's like, great. Do you want it to? No? Well, great. Let's talk about corporate transparency then. And you bring them on board that way, and that can become like the flagship point that people kind of drive forward with these strikes. And you can bring the lockdown protesters and the general strike protesters together and push forward. But but they don't want us to, right? But that's why you never see anything about a rent strike, anything about these worker strikes. There was, I think, The Intercept covered it. The Intercept covered the essential workers walkout on May Day. I think they also covered the rent strikes, and that is as close to any sort of mainstream media that covered these strikes at all. I think there might have been one article in the Wall Street Journal about the fact that rent strikes might be coming. But they don't want you to see that. They don't want you to hear what these reasonable demands are. They just want you to see that there are these right-wing people that are scared, and look what they're doing because of their fear. They're going out there with their guns and they're yelling at cops, and they're surrounding the Capitol. They're driving around in their big trucks, and they're all asking for haircuts, right? Like, and then you sit there and you go, well, that's ridiculous. Like, there's people that can't afford rent, and you're asking for your haircut, and that's what they want. They want you to think that these strike protests and the lockdown protests are the exact same thing. So anybody protesting is a kook asking for a haircut. Is this, far right Alex Jones conspiracy theory anti-vaxxer person that you can't trust? And they don't realize that there are these two separate groups that, once they meet in the middle, will probably be a much larger voice and a much more powerful voice than this country's ever seen. And that's scary to them, because if you look at the course of history, Fred Hampton was murdered in Chicago because he was going out and talking to rural white people, rural white workers, as a black lower class working person, and he was bridging the gap between the two races, and basically saying that, hey, even though we have different skin color, like, this is a class issue. This is an issue of the haves and the have-nots, and he was succeeding because he was doing that, and because that was so scary to them, because this movement would grow, and people like people like J. Edgar Hoover and Jeff Bezos and Sam Walton don't want to see that shit. They murdered the guy. They killed him. So I guess my warning is, I 100% think that these two groups need to meet, but I'm saying the closer we get to that, the more we have to keep an eye out for, bullshit like what happened with Fred Hampton, because they don't want these two groups to meet. They don't want these groups to talk to each other. They want them separated and polarized from each other, so that they don't realize that their demands and what they need are virtually the same thing.
Well, and I think too, Krish, like, oh, sorry, Andrew. I was just going to say, I think too, like, just that's so much what we see with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, because whereas everybody, each side, at least, those that are in power, the left, the right, everybody hates him. That also gives him that, in WikiLeaks, by giving people the truth, that unique position to unite people. Because a lot of what people, I think, are, disunited, if that's even a word, on, or, separated on, are things that are possibly not even true, and propaganda that everybody believes about the other side that's not, necessarily true. So sorry, Andrew, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, I was just going to try to pivot it towards talking a little bit about what happened outside of the Westminster's Magistrate Court yesterday. So Julian had a court hearing where they've officially rescheduled it tentatively until sometime in September to allow the defense more time, and hopefully for Julian to get better, because in the last 3 court hearings, he was not able to attend because he was unwell, according to the sources from in there, with really no further clarification made about that point. But there was a protest, if we could get the video queued up, outside of the court, and it actually got broken up by the police. Everyone there was following the UK's draconian social distancing guidelines, and they got moved in on. And I think it's really telling about what's coming down the pipe for protesters in general across the globe right now, because all these countries, the US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, are all part of what's called the Five Eyes Alliance, which is essentially an alliance of intelligence sharing from one country to the other, where they spy on each other's citizens so that way they don't inherently break the law. They use go-betweens like private security companies such as Palantir, who is now officially surveilling all of the UK GPS information. But long story short, there was a protest outside of there, which I think is wonderful, because we still need street action. The people are making decisions in and of themselves. Some of them had masks, some of them didn't, but they're using their rights of assembly. Could you get that pulled up so we could take a look at it real quick, Josh? So it's just a short little clip, but literally those people innocently standing outside of the Westminster's Magistrate Court, speaking up about free association and the freedom of the press, literally got moved on by police and forced to disperse with threat of police actions against them, which ultimately involves violence and incarceration in a time where the UK government's trying to let prisoners go because of a mass global pandemic. I was just wondering about your thoughts about the police not adhering to social distancing guidelines while they're still trying to attack protesters.
It's it's one of those things where it makes me laugh, because it's just like, aren't you supposed to be protecting and serving people, and you're doing the exact thing that you're attacking them for? Like, oh, you're not practicing social distancing, you don't have a mask on, and then they do the exact thing in order to enforce that rule. It's so asinine to me, and to me it's just it kind of feels like a failure of the justice system, when the justice system, and it's kind of, I think it's a bigger example of how you can see that the people within the justice system, even just like regular beat cops and stuff, are just look at themselves as being above the law rather than, people within it, and that people that represent the law, which is in my opinion what cops should be, but they're not, and that is kind of a glaring example of that. It's a glaring example of seeing that the police force definitely thinks of themselves as above the law and not a part of it, which is something people have been saying for a long time. I've been saying this for a very long time, is that the systemic problem within policing is that the police officers don't believe that they're part of the law that they are supposed to enforce and represent. And this is, I think, the most glaring example of it, where you are telling people and you are either violently attacking them or you're just incarcerating them for not wearing a mask and not socially distancing. And in order to enforce that law, you have to break that law yourself. It's the craziest thing that could possibly happen.
Right, and it really speaks back to like the nature of what they're trying to do with the coronavirus, because it is a problem. Like, there are people dying of this disease on a large scale, but through that, they're being able to implement all of these draconian measures to the point that in Australia, for the first time in history, I believe, we saw a protest organizer get arrested for, I believe, incitement 3 hours before his protest took place. And with him being in a Five Eyes nation, that's something that when it happens in one, it's going to happen in all of them because they share this pool of international draconian law. So it's terrifying to me because that wasn't a Free Assange protest. It was an actual immigration support. Like, there was a bunch of immigrants that were in a hotel, and these people were literally coming by to show support for them. And the organizer of it got arrested 3 hours before it happened. So it was just, I don't know, horrifying to see the state of the world, because protests will soon be considered something that's non-essential, because that's the direction that the world is headed at this point.
That's I think is the biggest concern, is what of your rights are you willing to give away just because we claim that we're in a state of emergency?
That might be a good way to introduce our next guest. Philip Beach is, I hope I'm saying that right, is
Yes.
a city councilwoman and deputy mayor right outside of Sydney, and we're very fortunate to have her this evening. We had some scheduling conflicts earlier, and I'm glad that it worked out. Philippa, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, and I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening with this connection, but it seems to, my computer seems to be like just totally freezing up, and I have to completely restart my computer. So that's what happened just before, which is very odd. So I will talk as quickly as possible, and if I suddenly disappear, it's because my computer's jammed up. Thanks for having me on, and I'd like to thank Ian Rose from the Support Assange and WikiLeaks Coalition, who has been really behind the work in Australia, and also Lisa Johnson, who spoke at our meeting. So I don't know if you have a similar local council system in the United States. I know they have quite a different system in the UK, where we have 3 levels of government: local councils, state governments, and obviously federal. I know in the United Kingdom, they don't have state governments. They have their local councils are a little bit like a combination of our state governments and local councils. So it's all a little bit different, but we're quite a lowly level of government. But at the moment, we don't have any state parliaments or federal parliaments sitting in Australia, which I gather is fairly unique. They've all sort of shut down due to COVID-19, and all the decisions are really being made behind closed doors by committees and so on, which is pretty terrible. But I attended the just online the meetings that were held. about 3 weeks ago now, on the 12-month anniversary of Assange's remand in Belmarsh prison, and that's sort of what prompted me to put up the motion. Did you have any specific questions you wanted to ask?
Well, I guess what I wanted to know, because you said it fell just shy of passing, and that there was sort of a watered down version that got put in for World Press Freedom Day. If you could kind of speak to that, like what does the watering down of that look like when an Australian citizen is being tortured in the Guantanamo Bay of the UK, waiting to go to court in America for an Espionage Act charge, when neither he nor his publishing outlet has anything to do with the United States in terms of citizenship or registry?
So, yeah, very happy to speak to that. So I worked very closely with Ian on the motion. We're certainly not the first council to put up a motion. A number of other councils had put them up, but not recently. So we did a fair bit of updating. What I mean by watered down is that in the end, council just supported the elements of the motion that related to, Press Freedom Day, and every reference that I had there about Julian Assange was amended out. So our councils are quite small. Like, our council area has about 154,000 people in it. As I said, it's a suburb in Sydney, very close to the Sydney CBD, really only like 5 or 10 kilometres from the Sydney Central Business District. We're in the eastern suburbs, not far from Bondi, or that area you might have heard of. But our council only has like 15 councillors. So that gives you an indication of the size. And it's a mix of, I'm a Green councillor, there's Labor, Liberal and some independents. And a lot of them are really very conservative and right-wing, in all honesty. It's pretty feral. It's... the level of debate is usually pretty low. There are some reasonably intelligent people on there, and they're well-educated, and others, interesting bunch. So in all honesty, I probably would have been surprised if we got it across the line. But one really positive thing was that, and what was surprising was that actually some people I expected to vote against it were actually supportive. And some people I expected to support it didn't. So it's just very polarising. But we got, at the last minute, I managed to get a message of support from the president of the MEAA, which is a big trade union called the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance. I worked there many years ago, and it's a big amalgamated union that represents journalists, actors, all sorts of people across those industries. And we got an email in support from the president of the media division, of the journalists division, which I was really hoping would help, but it probably just came in a bit too late. Pardon me. But I think there may be success. We're going to work more on getting it across the line in other councils. In Australia, certainly these days, I get a lot of third-party groups coming to councils seeking support. So we have a big group in Australia called Stop Adhering. I don't know if you've heard of the proposed Adhering coal mine, which is like this mega coal mine in Queensland, which most of Australia does not want. So they're a very active group. They've been contacting councils to put up motions to boycott sort of different contractors that might work for Adhering but also work for councils, like engineering firms. There's another group called Lock the Gate. We have a lot of coal seam gas projects like you do in the United States. There's some pretty bad ones coming down the line. So we have those groups, and they're really now coming to councils to put up motions. And that's even sometimes, even if it's just writing a letter to a company, really gives them the shits. So I honestly don't know how effective it is. I'm not kind of putting any tickets on myself or fellow councillors, but it's just one extra way. So it might be something you could try, in other countries, to approach your local councillor if you've got a progressive councillor to put up motions. And I don't know.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is there any unity between the anti-war movements, the environmental movements, and the free speech movement out in Australia? Have you guys, or do those groups interact at all in any kind of significant way, as one really impacts the other as far as reporting on war, standing against war, and then standing against the emissions and literal just expenditure of fuel that comes from war itself?
That's a good question. Look, in all honesty, if there are anti-war groups operating in Australia at the moment, they must be pretty low-key. The groups that are really prominent in Australia now are really the environmental groups. I guess just because we have so much coal, so much gas that's being exploited and sold around the world, that's become a movement. And there's many different ones operating. Until the whole climate movement really started to build up steam in the last few years, things were pretty low key in terms of activism. Places like Lock the Gate and stuff, again, those sort of anti-coal seam gas groups. There's different groups, but there's not a big anti-war movement here. Not a big free speech movement. We don't have a Bill of Rights in our constitution.
So
at all.
That was actually something I wanted to ask about, kind of in relation to David McBride's case and the raids that happened on ABC. Because for people who don't know, David McBride is an Australian whistleblower and former Australian Army officer that reported and turned things over to the media that were, I don't know the specific details, but basically exposed the politicization of the Australians' participation in the war in Afghanistan. I was just wondering if you had, I don't know, kind of any insights into what support looks like for him out there with Chris Wilkie, or not Chris Wilkie, one of the MP,
Andrew Wilkie,
being a former whistleblower himself. Is there a lot of support for David out there, or is he still kind of unknown?
Look, there's not a lot of reporting on him. The raids on the ABC that occurred last year were very well reported. So people were pretty up in arms about that. But David McBride is not a name you hear around much. That's sort of Andrew Wilkie is a really good independent member of Parliament, as you know, a former whistleblower himself. So he's been fantastic. But yeah, I'm sorry to say that's not really the case. We had we had two Australian citizens, obviously, David Hicks and Mamdouh Habib, who were locked up in Guantanamo in the early 2000s. They weren't journalists, obviously. And look, they're eventually built up. They were there for years, and eventually there was enough support to get them brought out of that. I don't know what it's going to take to do that, but I'm really going to I'm hoping that other councils will be able to get more active on the Julian Assange issue, which has obviously been going on for so many years, but it's just at such a critical point now. We don't want to be
question.
Go ahead.
sure.
Do you mind if I ask a question? What is sort of the general consensus amongst like the population about Assange? Is there are they against what's happening to him, or is this sort of like the same thing that we see in the States, where there are some people that are more informed and there are other people that kind of listen to the more corporate narrative that comes out, and there's mostly pushback against Assange?
There's just not that much discussion. I mean, you've got if you're on social media, obviously, you've got your algorithms kicking in, which are feeding you, different stories, based on your kind of interests and whatever things you've clicked on. So I will see a lot of stuff pop up on my news feed, but you don't see much about it in mainstream media. Your newspapers or your news bulletin, television news bulletins, and I wouldn't have a clue what I doubt whether the average person would be seeing much about him at all, and they're probably not thinking about it. But and I didn't even realise this, and so I started researching, doing a bit of background research for the motion. I had not even realised that a petition had been tabled in our federal parliament in February, and that's something that's of quite a lot of interest to me. And I didn't even realise that a petition that I had been aware of the petition, but I didn't know it was getting tabled in Parliament. And that was 270,000 people, one of the biggest petitions ever tabled in federal Parliament. But it got no coverage. It got no coverage, and no one was in Parliament at the time. So that's incredibly disappointing. But yeah,
I was gonna say, is your media kind of like what the media in the States is? I'm asking if this seems kind of like
sure.
a stupid question. I'm not
No,
familiar
not
with
at all.
Australia a whole lot,
No.
but yeah, that's why I'm like, when you said there's no Bill of Rights, I'm like, that's wild. To me, it's like, I don't know how you would operate something like that. But the question, I guess, is the media structure in Australia similar to what the media structure in the States is, which is essentially like 3 big corporations control most of the narrative?
Yeah, pretty much. Obviously, Rupert Murdoch, it was originally Australian, so this is where he started. So, he owns a lot of newspapers. Some towns and cities only have one newspaper, and that's a Murdoch, that's a News Corp publication.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm not joking. The media here is very limited, and so in Sydney, for example, we have 2, and Melbourne's are similar. We've got 2 newspapers. One is just a really lowbrow tabloid, News Corp tabloid, which is basically just a propaganda arm of the coalition government, or vice versa. The coalition government's a propaganda arm of News Corp. They're that kind of it's terrible. Like, there's just no objectivity, not even a semblance of it. And then we have another newspaper, which is not bad, but that recently was bought out by one of our major commercial television networks, Channel 9. So, and there's been like just massive, in my late 40s, I still like to read print paper. So I'm still in that thing, we get the papers delivered, but we're probably in the minority. The minority of people are still buying print, but obviously they've lost a huge, like, all of their advertising revenue has just vanished. So over the last decade or so, there have just been massive layoffs of journalists, full stop. Whether it's in the ABC, which is our national broadcaster, a bit like the BBC, very highly respected. So they're constantly getting funding cuts. They're a national broadcaster funded, so there's no commercials, no advertising, so they're fully funded. So every year they just have budget cuts. They are laying off journalists and staff, and the same with the other media outlets, I guess the newspapers, news media outlets, mass layoffs of journalists. So the media landscape here is pretty bad, really.
Yeah, it sounds pretty similar to what's happening in the States.
Yeah, I don't think we've got Sky News, which is owned by Fox or News Corp. I don't think it's pretty. I mean, I don't subscribe to it, so I don't. It's cable or whatever. So that's pretty bad, but I don't think it's as bad as the American Fox. Not
no,
well. It's close, but not quite.
We like to be pretty exceptional in the States. We're pretty.
Yeah.
We like to be number one, including.
Yeah.
So we got propaganda, incarcerated citizens per capita, military spending, and number of adults who believe angels are real. That's
USA. USA.
number one. We're number one. Wow.
Actually, we saw a thing. I saw a story on one of our current affairs shows last night about some weird American church that's getting people to drink bleach, and apparently, they put there's little bottles of bleach, and you put drops of bleach in your water. And there's some outlet of that in Australia too.
So like holy water.
Got people drinking.
Rocks.
It's called MMS or something. And it's some church, and this guy's called there's some pope of this church, and anyway.
Oh, man, well, I kind of don't think it's that far fetched.
We're probably getting off topic now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not super far fetched, but I was going to say we do have snake handling churches in America where they make you hold a snake, and if it bites you and you don't die, you have the love of Jesus.
That just makes me think of The Campaign. I don't know if you guys seen that Will Ferrell movie.
Oh.
No, yeah. I've heard of it. Yeah, I should see.
If you haven't, it's hilarious, and it basically codifies what Citizens United is in a nice little hour-and-a-half long comedy. But yeah. I do wanna ask you, with the raids on ABC that took place, are there people that talk about that, even if it's kind of in the whispers about what's going on and things? Because with lacking some type of First Amendment or constitutional protection for journalists, the Australian government's literally allowed to write a law that allows it to edit what's in a newsroom and edit history, essentially. Is there do people talk about that in Australia, or is that something that's kind of...
Well, the news cycle is just so rapid. There's just always something happening. I mean, that was Australian Federal Police, so it wasn't the government as such, but, there was, highly likely to be political influence there. But that really, at the time, was not something that was supported, and even News Corp, all the big media outlets came out and wrote open letters, and there was even they were touting freedom of speech and so on. But then we had all the big bushfires. I mean, they were just so all-consuming. They're so terrible. That just took over everything in the country, pretty much. There was no reporting on anything else much at all, because it was such a disaster. I mean, we had about 18 million hectares of forest burnt. I mean, a significant part of the southern east coast of Australia was burnt. Most of our national parks. It's an absolute disaster. So that just took over everything for quite a few months. And then pretty much right at the end of that, we've obviously had the coronavirus. And now that's all we hear any reporting on. You don't hear anything else reported on, pretty much. So that's kind of been the situation here for the last 6 months. Bushfires for 3 months, and then corona. So no, there's that discussion about the ABC raids and so on has just sort of gone completely off the radar.
One question that I do have for you is that what advice would you have for us or for people who, you know, would like to approach their city council person or, you know, something like that, of the best way to approach someone in your position? I mean, obviously, I think you're a little bit more open-minded than most and willing to listen and also, you know, look for the truth on your own. But what, you know, some of your colleagues, I mean, what do you think is the best way for, say, even just somebody like me to approach my city council person?
Well, I don't know. Now you guys have all frozen, so I can hear you. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Oh, no. Kevin.
I don't know if she's coming back. She might have to restart her computer because she did say that it was acting up on her like that.
Right.
So she may have to turn it off and turn it back on real quick.
I think it's kind of wild that Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights. Does anybody else think that's kind of wild?
Yes,
Yeah.
I know. Where do you? Yeah, it's completely wild.
They were one of the last nations, and then I think it's been about 100 years to break British power. Left the English Empire, kind of hung out, did its own thing, while America fucking like slapped everyone in the face, and then just didn't finish its revolution. Like, it's the craziest thing to me.
That's wild. I know, and when she comes back, she might have a little bit more of an insight. But I know New Zealand had a bunch of like worker strikes and big worker revolutions and stuff. Hey, she's. But I was gonna. I like. Do you know if New Zealand has any?
I think you're back.
I can see you guys. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, no,
Can you see me?
So we assume that we have an assigned like NSA or CIA agent that like fucks with our stream when we ask him. Questions. So we
anyway, I'll try and I'll quickly try.
Particular reason.
You're good.
My computer's making a very weird noise.
Oh.
So I'll just quickly try and answer the question, and I'm happy to come back next week. But I don't know your system of local government there.
So we have city council followed and mayor, followed by county, state, and then federal.
Right. So you got county as well. Okay. So look, I don't know really enough about any similarities or differences. I mean, here on our local council, we have a council website, and all the councillors' details are published on those. Not everyone puts a phone number up, but they should have some number. They should certainly have an email, or they might be on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or something. I mean, there must be some way of contacting your local representative and asking for a meeting.
Yeah, no, I think I meant more like, how the best way is, how do you like being approached? If you see an email from someone with just a ton of links or you know what I mean, that kind of thing.
Well, I guess, first of all, it would be helpful to sort of, if you knew a good councillor to approach based on their, political affiliations, or just if you know the kind of things that they represent, it helps if you're a local voter, obviously. So that's why if you live in their area, like within our council, we're also broken up into wards. And so we're only voted on by actually a relatively small amount of people in the council area who in our ward. So if you are someone who is able to vote for that person directly, that's obviously just a good point of a place to start. You're a local voter. I guess I'm pretty progressive, so if other groups contact me, I'm always happy to meet them or talk to them. I can't speak for other councillors, but certainly the fact that you are a constituent who votes would stand for something. And there seem to be so many Assange support groups out there. There must be some in your local area who could.
We are the ones in our local area. That's
Yeah, that's right. Well,
Kendra here has the Denver Action for Assange chapter, and you know, we do what we can here just around town, but like I live in the middle of nowhere. The closest to me is about a half an hour of any size. You know, like we have one stop sign in my town. One.
Wow. Where do you live?
I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Northern California. I'm a little bit south of San Francisco in the big old redwood trees.
And so I can't see, I hope it's all right to ask, because I can't see anyone's name. So are you Steve?
I am Steve, yes.
You're Steve. And there's, okay, cool. I can sort of see over the hovering now, sort of. So yeah, I mean, I have to say, I get attacked. Like I put these kind of motions up most meetings. There'll be some kind of issue, and you know, you have to psychologically prepare yourself, because you do really get attacked. You know, you get really attacked by other councillors for putting up motions they don't consider relate to local issues. So it can get pretty feral. It's not pleasant. But I guess it's good to have a look at, like we have, unfortunately in Australia, the local government is also not recognised in our constitution. So we are just subject to all sorts of state government acts, largely. So there is a state local government act and all sorts of different acts of state, acts of parliament that we are subject to. So I guess I often would refer back to our act and the objects of the act and the aims of the act, which are sort of stated out. You can just look up the relevant legislation online. And it does say that councillors are there to advocate on issues that are important to their local community. So you can always go back to those very basic principles. That can be quite helpful, you know. So you can broaden, there is scope to broaden things out, but it sort of depends on the kind of politics of the mayor and your general manager. You know, in some councils they might just rule some things out of order, you know. It would, you know, it's probably helpful to go along to some of your local council meetings or view them online and just see what it's like, see what the councillors are doing. That could be a good place to start, you know. Attend your local council meetings, get to see who's on there, get your supporters to start, you know, you've obviously got a big network to start taking a bit of notice and maybe using that. But again, you know, I don't want to overstate, you know, what impact, you know, I was happy to do it, but what impact it will have, I've got no idea, you know. It would take a lot. But you've got to start somewhere. That's the whole idea. Like have you heard of the Climate Emergency Declaration? You heard of? No?
No.
So there's a small, very progressive council in a suburb in Melbourne called Darebin Council, very left-wing, very green, and they said, we're going to declare a climate emergency. This is a state of emergency, you know, and we're going to change everything in our council to get rid of all the emissions. And then they went around trying to get lots of other councils to declare a climate emergency. Now, there are now, I think, close to 2,000 jurisdictions worldwide who have declared a climate emergency, including the British Parliament, you know, certain big states in Canada and so on, and they represent millions and millions of people. So sometimes something small doesn't always happen. Most of the time it doesn't, but occasionally a small action at a local council level or an individual level obviously will spread out. So the idea is to get strength in numbers and to get more councils. It would be amazing to get councils in the United States, in the United Kingdom to do it. But I know the council set up in somewhere like the United Kingdom, in England is very different, and it's probably more difficult there.
Have you reached out to any groups like the Global Parliament of Mayors or Leagues of Cities? Like there's like groups nationally and internationally that essentially allow you to network with other mayors and council folk around the world. That may be something that would be a way for us to spread this kind of information.
Well, I don't know of them, so I'm not involved in any of those groups. I haven't even heard of them. So if you want to send me some information, I'd be happy to look at it for sure. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Oh,
sure.
Is that okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut anybody off.
Go ahead.
I'm really fascinated with this idea of like you guys don't have a Bill of Rights. Is there a push for reforming that to introduce an idea like that, or are you guys kind of like are most Australians just kind of cool with not having a Bill of Rights and kind of playing it by ear and figuring things out in terms of legislation as it kind of comes up?
Certainly the Greens, and there's probably been different Labor politicians, but certainly it's sorry, my son's there. Greens are trying to get a Charter of Rights or a Bill of Rights. I'm not a lawyer, but I've bought a legal textbook about our Constitution, and that's certainly something that's kind of discussed very, very prominently. But there's a lot of people, but they've never been able to get it into Parliament. The Labor Party did have it on their election platform, the last election, but then they didn't win. So who knows, maybe the next time there's a Labor government, they may or may introduce one. And the majority of Australians just wouldn't even have a clue, probably. But certainly anyone who's got an interest in left-wing politics are aware of the fact that we don't have one and that we need one. Absolutely.
I think that you have to go, Chris, or you need to wind down here.
Yeah.
We always love it when you come on, man. It's
thank you for having me.
And will you please just kind of give us some closing out thoughts and let everybody know where they can find and where they can get those tickets to your virtual stand-up shows and whatnot?
Yeah, I would say. But by the way, Philippa, you're fucking awesome. You're a wealth of knowledge and like.
I'd love to come back. Yeah, I'll come back and
Like this has been awesome. Just kind of sitting here and listening and like learning about stuff. But I would say
there's countries that are actually more shit than your own. That's what's even more oppressed.
Feel better about things. But I don't know what closing thoughts I have other than keep up the good fight in terms of fighting for Assange and for press freedoms, because it's him today, but who knows who it's going to be tomorrow. Is it going to be me or this channel, or is it going to be the Gray Zone? Is it going to be Lee Camp? And then now it's in our backyard and we have to fight for it. So keep your eye on those sort of things, and be careful, because when both faces of the corporate oligarchy start agreeing on the same thing, there's a reason for why they're doing that, and it's usually not a good reason. So once that starts to happen, especially being that it's an election season in the United States, we're going to see a lot more of those arguments where reaching across the aisle is going to seem to be this very noble act, and in terms of corporate politicians, it's really not. It's a false flag. It's to coddle you and pacify you into thinking that this complacency is the right thing to do. It's the status quo, and the status quo has never fucking helped anybody. The status quo is why we are in the position we are. today. So I would say beware of the status quo. And as for finding all my stuff is up on my website, which is ramennoodlescomedy.com. That's RAMAN noodlescomedy.com. I made that website when I was 21 and thought it was fine. But that's my website. And then, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel through here, I can put the link to the ticketing thing in the comments if that's cool with you guys. Cool. I'm getting the thumbs up. Awesome. And thank you guys for having me. It's always good to come and chat with you guys and rant and rave about all the crazy shit going on. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Krish Mohan. Did you get that chat question, Andre?
Yeah. So we have two questions from the chat for you. The first one is, what advice could you share with people about approaching elected officials regarding highly controversial material, like going to a city council or a state representative talking about Julian Assange and other issues like that may seem like polarizing or out there?
It always helps. Thank you for the question. Again, perhaps view or attend in whatever way you're able to these days. Your local councils might be still meeting and you can maybe still go to them. Go and watch them, watch the councillors. Go back through, hopefully in Australia they're referred to as the business papers, the big books. They should all be online. You should be able to go and look at the motions, and if you go to the minutes, you'll be able to see how people voted. Just get to know your local elected representatives. If you have a local group, as I said, who lives in the area that votes for them, that's really probably the most effective way. But obviously, if you're going to go to a very conservative councillor with a request to put up a motion on a controversial issue, they probably will just ignore you. So I'm a Greens. I don't know if you have many Greens councillors over there, but I'd certainly be saying try your Greens councillors. See what kind of legislation or acts that govern your councils. Just get a bit of and see what you can refer to that would give you some scope. Something that's very successful in our area is when you have an issue. It's not necessarily a controversial issue, but it's something, an issue that, for example, a union may be interested in. So it would be fantastic if you could get a representative of your local journalists union who lived in the area especially, but even if they don't, to write letters. As in emails.
In the UK, we saw the recent labor leaks, which exposed the just blatant raw corruption within the Labour Party in the United Kingdom. In 2016, we had the DNC leaks and the Podesta emails that exposed the raw amount of money laundering and election fraud within the United States. Do people suspect, or is there a frequency of election fraud in Australia? How is election integrity handled out there?
Well, there's certainly plenty of corruption around, but with elections, I think, I would say the majority of Australians, probably myself included, have a high degree of confidence in our electoral system. It's run by, we have independent electoral commissions. We have a federal electoral commission and state-based electoral commissions. They're statutory bodies at arm's length from any particular government or political party. And I could be wrong, but they seem to operate with a pretty high level of integrity. There's a lot of electoral boundaries do change from time to time, because basically within any particular electorate there should be roughly the same population. I lived in a state called Queensland. I grew up there, and it was very corrupt, and they had a gerrymandered political electoral system there for maybe 40 or 50 years, that allowed one very corrupt party to dominate, and it was pretty much operated as a police state. But I think that government was brought down by a terrific journalist, actually, a report. So we have a pretty good electoral system here. It would be very difficult for anyone to influence that. There are other types of corruption, obviously, but not electoral.
So one last question, and this isn't coming from the chat, but is there any way to try to get like the Irwins and the Sydney Zoo involved? Like, is that, I know that seems like weird and like left fieldish, but like I picture them as just an ignorant American being like, not celebrity, but like well known out there inside of a sphere of people that don't receive information about stuff like this.
So are you talking about for America or for Australia? Because like the Irwins are just not really. Do you mean like Steve Irwin, like his family?
Yeah,
who you're talking
like,
about?
prominent environmentalists, I guess. Is there any way to like maybe expose them to like the Milton Report and to Rotfish and to the other environmental documents that WikiLeaks has shown as a way to try to get the environmental movement in Australia to support them?
Look, we hear nothing about them at all. Like, so I don't know, maybe they have shows in America or something, that they're not really in any kind of way public figures in Australia.
Oh, yeah, sometimes they're in like the Jimmy Kimmel shows and stuff.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my son's giving me feedback because he watches a lot of American stuff on YouTube. So I've just been informed that they go on American TV shows, but they're not on Australian TV shows as far as I know. But that would be interesting. There's a lot of other environmental groups, and so if WikiLeaks has done work in exposing, environmental crimes or whatever, sure, that could be something that could be of help. But are you looking more at you're looking at America, of getting your American councillors on board? Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, Andrew, for here as well. That's a really good idea.
But I guess, you've all been activists in this area. I'm just a bit of a blow-in in all honesty. I grew up, Julian Assange was born in Queensland, and I'm pretty sure, I think he was born in 1971, which is when I was born. So I think we're both, a lot of people who grew up in Queensland in that particular era, the 1970s and 80s, became very politicised because it was essentially a police state run by the National Party and this very, very corrupt politician and a bunch of cronies. But yeah, you've all been doing this a long time. I can just, I put up a motion last week, so I don't know if I'm the best person to really really advise you, but
we're happy enough to find anyone involved with government at any level who will willingly say Julian Assange's name out loud or try and bring attention to these issues. And we couldn't be happier to have you join us. We are going to start to wind down. We've got like 15 minutes of news left. But Philippa, thank you so much for being with us, and please come back.
Yeah, I'll come back and just listen in on next week. If you just send me, the YouTube link, I'll just happy to listen into you all. It's really interesting.
Certainly, and please do, if you run into Ian or Lissa, tell them we say hello and send our love. And will you just kind of let people know where they can find you, and if you have any closing thoughts, please share them.
Yeah, look, I think, as I said, in Australia, thank you, just super briefly, there is a bit of local progressive councillors do get approached by groups to put up motions. It can create a little bit of media coverage from time to time, or it can target a particular company. I ultimately don't know how effective it is, but obviously you can potentially build things up, and it does create a bit of interest. So it is one way that you can look at, because local government are, in theory, the level of government closest to the community, and they really should be directly engaging with local community members on issues that are important to them. So there's absolutely, you should give it a try.
Thank you so much. I know that it might not seem like a lot to you, but it is helpful to hear some advice, because I know here in, Colorado, we've had some successes, but a lot of times we just hit, just no response at all from from any of our representatives. So
Wow.
it's really nice, even though you're not our representative. I mean, you still are representing people everywhere by doing what you did. So, thank you so much. And, it was really great to meet you and hear from you.
Yeah, great to meet you all too. Thanks very much for the invite.
All right, Philippa Beach. That was awesome. Very lovely. I'm glad that got to happen. We do have some news, guys. Of course, as of Monday, we found out that Julian Assange's trial, the second round of the extradition, is set for September 7th. This trial will go on, or hearing will go on, for 3 weeks. This is the witness testimony phase of the extradition hearing, the first part being evidentiary. I think a total of 21 witnesses have been slated to be called. I don't know off the top of my head if that's total or by the defense. We are very, very, very excited to announce, and if I have to put it up, Josh, just let me know, because I can grab it. I did. Yeah, okay. But we're very excited to announce our GoFundMe to take to the streets of Washington, D.C. and continue the demonstrations and events that we had back in February. We are going to be organizing furiously for this and reaching out to a number of different groups that we just did not have a chance to last time. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up on the share then. And here we go. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that this is in the chat again. If you guys can, please do donate. If you can't, please share the link, because it really does make a difference. We've got, this was, I believe, in front of the Washington Post, or right in front of where the Hill and Politico have their offices, where Crystal Ball lied to us to our faces. And then this was at the William G. Truesdale Detention Center, where Chelsea Manning and Jeremy Hammond were housed, but are no longer. We're not going to take complete credit for that, but we'll take some. And then this was right across the street from where Seth Rich was murdered. We had a little candlelight vigil for him there. And we were able to go see Kevin and Margaret at the Embassy Protectors trial. It really does mean the world if you share the link. It really helps us get our word out. We're going to be hitting it really, really hard. And it is a 3-week trial, so we are going to try to be there for as much as humanly possible, and we cannot do that without you guys. Andrew?
Yeah, I just want to say that week that we were in DC, we probably raised more thoughts in the minds of reporters and journalists just for the day that we spent outside of ABC, The Hill, Politico, and the Washington Post than they had ever really thought about their career before. So I'm excited because there's a whole news district in DC to really put on some impactful events down there. But yeah, we had some videos released by Stella Morris recently. And she put out basically a 4-part series of it. Are we going to articles first? My bad.
I thought we were going to go cover the Duteric's coverage of the trial, just because we were talking about the
we could do that.
and how it was set. We're doing it live. Doing it live.
My bad. I apologize. I was out of order.
Doing it live. So yeah, if we could go to that article real quick, though, that would be fantastic, and run this down, bam, pow, fast. The opening of the article, of course, talking about the protesters who were dispersed by special operations officers. These are not regular London bobbies. These are cops who were there with a specific purpose. That purpose, of course, to be disrupting the free assembly of people protesting on behalf of Julian Assange. And let's get down to the meat here. We know this. Let's go through it one more time. If extradited, the award-winning journalist who exposed numerous war crimes could face 175 years imprisonment once on U.S. soil. That follows more than a year that he's been held on remand without being convicted of a crime, in addition to the 7 spent and arbitrarily detained in the Ecuadorian embassy. And again, guys, can't stress this enough. The British government's official position is we can't let him out because we haven't charged him with anything. Once the extradition proceedings hear evidence in Assange's case, he'll have spent 18 months in Belmarsh, where he's currently incarcerated. Laurie Love, a British-Finnish computer scientist who successfully appealed his U.S. extradition in 2018, told Bridges for Media Freedom that the court process was becoming the punishment itself. Quote, 18 months is longer than I had to wait for my own extradition hearing. It's a horrific legal process to go through under the best conditions. It takes a cumulative toll on your physical and mental health. I was able to participate meaningfully in my own defense, which Julian cannot due to his unnecessary detention in Belmarsh. This has been exacerbated by restrictions on his access to lawyers and family as a result of the coronavirus. We cannot have justice if the process itself becomes a punishment. Kendra, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's such a good point that was made, and also especially from Laurie Love saying that that experience that he went through was so traumatic, and then to hear from him that it's been obviously much worse and longer for Assange. And then on top of that, my thoughts on that really are that right now, Wise Up Action has always put out some really good links of who to contact. So I think now is a good time to really pressure the court, because they're deciding which court is going to hear this case, which court will have the space to hear it. So I think it's important that we make sure that they have public space, and that we really voice our concerns over that now within the next coming week. And then I also think, we really need to put the pressure on. It's disturbing to me that I know September is a ways away, which is much better than July, but it's still not that far away to prepare, if they're only seeing Assange for 1 week. I'm thinking about us preparing for DC in September, and that's so much work. And here they are preparing on such a huge case. So those are kind of my thoughts right now, just in the upcoming weeks, while they're sort of deciding on these things. That might be some good individual actions that we could all take.
And I think with the way he's being treated and the length of time he's been in Belmarsh, it reflects essentially what SAMS is in the United States, the Special Administrative Action that we covered a couple of weeks ago. Essentially, during this time, he doesn't have contact with almost anyone. He's spending 23 hours a day in prison, in a cell by himself, if not longer. We know that Belmarsh prison is essentially shut down due to coronavirus. There's been a shitload of people that have called off there. There has been 2 deaths from coronavirus in that prison alone. And it's now been 3 court hearings in a row where Julian Assange was reported not in attendance because he was unwell, for whatever unwell means.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Andrew, because that is a huge point, and that's been something I've been wondering. You know, I mean, he has to be pretty unwell to not be able to attend one of these hearings. So
right. And who can you even contact about that? About him just being called unwell? What department do you call? What person in Belmarsh do you have to speak with? Because that's something that to me is just freaking insane, that this world-renowned journalist can be held for 18 months, and for the last, I want to say a month, if not longer now, hasn't even been able to attend his own trials due to being unwell.
Yeah, this goes back to March 23rd or 24th, when he was too ill to attend the first time. And we don't know. This is not like we haven't had anyone come out to make an official statement, yes or no. I did read earlier today that he will have, they'll have another opportunity to present him to the court in June. I hope he's well enough for that, but I would like to be able to speak with somebody on his legal team who could kind of, confirm or deny as to how the state of his overall health. Our friend Mohammed Almazi, writing out of Sputnik, was able to grab a short interview with John Shipton, Julian's father, as the court let out. And just kind of highlight a little bit of this. It's not too terribly long. If my computer stops freaking out, wow, that was neat. So Mo asks John Shipton what he thinks of the judge's decision to schedule in September. And Shipton says the September date suits us, suits me, and suits the family, so we can all come and attend the hearing. It's a continuous hearing, so that's much more suitable to the defense. It's actually a relief to have the date from September 7th onwards. As to whether or not there's concern the hearing might be moved to a court outside of London, John Shipton says, well, I don't quite understand that because I don't know London very well and how far it stretches. However, we'll fight that battle when we come to it. We won today. And I guess from now on, we'll keep winning. And then as to whether or not he had a reaction to the police dispersing protesters, he says, oh, well, they just think they're doing their job. It's a lockdown, so we're okay with that. Mo has been doing these question and answer interviews for Sputnik pretty much exclusively. So if you're looking for the rest of his work, you can go to his website, theinterregnum.com, and check that out there. And as Andrew mentioned, we do have a few videos that Julian Assange's fiance and the mother of his 2 young children, Gabriel and Max, the lovely and brilliant Stella Morris, put together I think it was either on or right after World Press Freedom Day. So if we could cue those and let them roll through, please, Sleepy Josh, that would be awesome.
As we're getting those pulled up, I just want to comment on the ridiculousness that those police officers weren't wearing masks.
Yeah, there'd be a massive spread. You know what I mean? Like that'll be on the next news headlines, like how COVID's been spreading through the police departments because, or they're immune. The police get a secret vaccine. I don't know.
Cell 23 hours a day.
Okay, well, if they're not cooperating, they're not cooperating. I apologize. Bummer.
I will put the links into chat for everybody to take a look at them.
No, it's all good. We're already overtime anyway, So, you guys want to go ahead and wind it on down?
Yeah. My name is Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. You can find this on action_4 Assange. You can find our website at actionforassange.com. We put out weekly actions for everyone to get engaged with online right now. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody that joined us this evening and viewership, as well as for being a guest.
And I'm Kendra Christian. You can follow me on Twitter at edebs13, and you can follow Denver Action for Assange at DNVFreeJA. Thanks everybody for watching, and thank you to our guests, absolutely great guests tonight. And thank you to our group in Denver, because they took part in this action that Wise Up Action had put out, and we contacted, just with a few of us, over 30 press organizations for World Press Freedom Day. So thank you to everyone in Denver for taking part in that. I really appreciate it.
My name is Steve Poikinen, and I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on YouTube by typing Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I have a fantastic week scheduled, capping off this morning, or I guess continuing on from this morning's wild interview with John McAfee. Go watch that. It's full-length interview is available on the Rockfin, and it's up there for free. So if you sign up for a Rockfin account, you get to watch the full-length interview. It's phenomenal. Vanessa Beeley will be on this week. Robbie Yeager and I will be doing a deep dive on Sunrise Movement. The Reverend Annie Chambers returns to Slow News Day this Sunday on Mother's Day. We're gonna have a little post-church barbecue Mother's Day style Slow News Day with the Reverend Annie. So that's going to be fantastic. Corey Morningstar is going to be on the show. Whitney Webb is coming back on Monday. We're crushing it. Thanks so much to everybody watching. We love you guys. Please do share the GoFundMe, and if you can, donate. If you can't, obviously just get the link out there. Thank you to Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos. Thank you to Kimber, the Mean Panda, for the graphics work. My co-hosts Andrew and Kendra, you guys freaking rock. And we will see you Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Until then, good luck to us all.